Since prehistoric times, humans have progressed by invention, whether it was the control of fire, the development of the wheel, or hunting weapons. From the very beginning, Homo sapiens was on a constant search to improve the life of his species. Thousands of years later, in the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci had revolutionary and dangerous ideas to improve life, like his drawings of flying machines, predating the real thing by many centuries. Sadly, such geniuses were often viewed with hostility by the authorities in their own time. 300 years later, it was a very different story, with inventing being celebrated rather than viewed with suspicion, as it entered one of its most fertile periods in the 19th century. Along with the great advances made in engineering and science during this period, many other more bizarre inventions were created, most of which would never make it beyond the Patents Office. It is to the inventors of these inspired but flawed ideas this film is dedicated, and where better to start than in the home? In the 19th century, the sewing machine was an important part of many households, but it seems the drudgery of sitting and working for hours at these machines was quite an issue for housewives of the day. So much so that at least two inventors came up with ideas to reduce the tiredness and monotony on the operators. The first was an English inventor with this canine-powered sewing machine in 1874. He may well have got the idea from an earlier age when dogs were regularly used to turn spits in 18th century kitchens. Indeed, there was a dedicated breed known as the turnspit dog, and several of them lived out their retirement as pets of Queen Victoria. But it seems the dog-powered sewing machine fell at the first hurdle, being considered too cruel to animals. The second idea was by that great American businessman and inventor, Thomas Edison, who came up with this talkie sewing machine. Adapting the technology of telephony, he created this device where the operator's words were converted to electrical power when she spoke to her sewing machine. But, apart from the problem of intermittent power caused by the modulation of the voice, nobody could stand talking to an unresponsive machine for any length of time. So, in spite of Edison's suggestion that the operators read poetry or sing to their sewing machines, his invention was not a commercial success. The problem of sleepless or colicky babies was another common domestic challenge that caught the attention of inventors. But it's doubtful that this baby's dark bed, where a lid was shut down on the crying child, was effective or even safe. History does not record how many infants were suffocated by this device. This invention, that rocked the baby to sleep whilst churning butter, was no doubt a safer option and described by humorist Mark Twain as the ideal labour-saving device. Health was also a major preoccupation for the Victorians. With their suspicion of fresh air bringing all sorts of ailments, they tended to keep their windows shut tight and households stuffy. It took Monsieur Fondatas, a Belgian inventor, with his megaphone ventilator to bring a breath of fresh air into the headache-rich environment of the 19th century home. And for those who were already ill, there was this sweat bed, patented in Amsterdam in 1876. Unfortunately, although it cured the patient's fever, it also gave them nasty scalds and burns. Finally, female guests who suddenly felt faint could gracefully collapse into this swooning chair, whose spinning paddles provided soothing draughts of air to revive them. They were driven by these cogs and pulleys activated by the lady's weight. Entertaining in affluent 19th century households was also legendary, but then as now it provided a logistical nightmare for the lady of the house. This miniature railway delivering food from the kitchen was designed to cut out interruptions by clumsy human servants during lavish dinner parties. Those gentlemen guests look a bit uncomfortable though. Perhaps they're wondering how they can get out from under the table with their dignity intact. The recreational needs of the Victorian man and lady of the house were also not forgotten by the inventors of the day. And for the man of the house, this home mountaineering machine invented by Friedrich Mayer in 1893 was the ideal device to prepare him for the real rigours of mountain climbing. Why he needed a dedicated air supply at an altitude of 6 or 8 feet is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, his wife could update her diary with this fountain pen, with ink delivered by compressed air, but not something you could easily carry in your handbag. And when it came to hobbies, the new wonder of photography was definitely at the top of the list for aspiring families in the 19th and early 20th century. Whilst most of their efforts were black and white pictures of family members, there were inventors who took photography to a different level, such as Julius Neubrunner, who used pigeons to take pictures literally out of this world. In 1908, he successfully patented aerial photography by pigeon to capture these landscapes of his native Germany. 5 years earlier, those two French geniuses, the Lumiere brothers, came up with an idea that would revolutionize and change photography forever. In 1903 they patented autochrome, the first successful mass-produced colour photography process. And how did they do it? Quite simply, they used the light-sensitive qualities of the humble potato. Unbelievably, the basis of these wonderful pastel images is potato starch particles, dyed in the colours of red, green and blue, then stuck to photographic plates. Autochrome remained the primary commercial colour film until the advent of slide films such as Kodachrome in the 1920s, and didn't actually cease production until the mid-1950s. That nature could be unpredictable and even dangerous was not lost on early inventors. One of these was the French polymath Barbot de Bourg, who translated Benjamin Franklin's works into French in 1762. De Bourg became fascinated by Franklin's descriptions of attempting to capture electricity from lightning coursing through the skies above Philadelphia in 1752. As a result, he invented this umbrella with a conductor and earth as a protection against random lightning strike harming the unwary walker. In fact, it became quite fashionable amongst well-heeled Parisians, with conductors disguised by feathers in ladies' hats, with the earth wire discreetly trailing down the backs of their dresses. Then, in 1887, there was a London hat maker who thought of this pocket umbrella to fit over your hat in the event of a sudden downpour, and which he grandly advertised as being safe in any hurricane. Meanwhile, in colonial Africa, German soldiers wore this hat, which collected tropical rainwater to drink later. Unfortunately, many nasty bugs and viruses harboured in the hats, contaminating the rainwater and making it undrinkable. In their search for better and faster means of travel, some early inventors flirted with single-wheel contraptions such as this velocipede or the French military cycle, whilst Lewis Harper's motorcycle reached 30 miles an hour until a near-fatal crash killed his dreams. Inevitably, all these exciting but impractical inventions soon vanished to be replaced by the duller but safer two-wheeled bicycle we still recognise today. The 19th century saw the wide-scale introduction of electronic trams, bringing with them new dangers on the roads. Because trams were quieter than horse-drawn transport, the likelihood of knocking down unwary pedestrians became a real safety issue. In the 1890s, a Los Angeles inventor came up with this pedestrian catcher as a solution to the rising accident rate. Instead of being mangled under the tram wheels, the jaywalker had a nice soft landing on this bed in front of the tram. But in reality it proved more likely to kill or injure any pedestrians that got in its way. A variation of the pedestrian catcher made two brief returns, firstly with this one mounted on a French taxi in the 1920s, and then with this one mounted on a truck in the 1930s. But both were failures, proving as lethal as their predecessor. The love affair with early automobiles was not lost on the inventors of the day. For example, there was this remarkably futuristic amphitheatre car, designed by French aristocrat Beson de Talleyrand-Périgord, whose aim was to give all the occupants as wide a view as possible. Or Mr. Blackmore's flying car equipped with a balloon to allow it to soar over traffic jams. One suspects problems with parking did for that one. This dog-powered car, known as the Cynosphere, appeared in France in the 1880s, but soon vanished, possibly because of animal welfare concerns. And nobody seems to know what happened to this early amphibious car that was last seen travelling across a lake in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris in 1887. With 19th century sea travel being a byword for discomfort and danger, it's hardly surprising that many inventions to save lives at sea reached the patent offices. Like Bateman's jam jar lifeboat, with its 50 compartments for crew and passengers to jump into when their ship went down. But whilst the compartments saved survivors from drowning, being airtight, they also suffocated them. This fatal flaw became apparent when it was demonstrated on the River Hudson in 1831, and Bateman had to be rescued from suffocating. 8 years later, a Captain Stone and his wife demonstrated their elaborate life-saving outfit on the Hudson River as well, with the captain producing a cigar from a watertight case and smoking it, whilst his wife played a nifty hand of cards. Whether it saved any lives is open to question, but it was certainly an early triumph of marketing. Then there was Sir Henry Bessemer, most famous for his invention of the revolutionary steel process by the same name. Because he suffered from severe bouts of seasickness, Bessemer wanted to save his fellow humans the same sort of misery, so he designed this anti-seasickness ship with its saloon mounted on gimbals, which in theory would keep it stable in the roughest of seas. Whilst the model worked well on land, the full-sized SS Bessemer proved unwieldy and difficult to handle. On her maiden voyage in May 1875, the Bessemer collided with the Calais pier, partially destroying it. Ironically, the ship's unique anti-seasickness saloon was locked on this voyage due to suspected serious instability. After that single voyage, she never sailed again and was scrapped in 1879. Other sea-related inventions have had less peaceful purposes, such as those dreamed up by Captain Cowper Phipps Coles, late of the Royal Navy. He had become a national hero in the Crimean War when a shallow draft boat named the Lady Nancy, which he designed, helped successfully besiege the city of Taganrog with its 32-pound gun. In 1859, Coles successfully lodged a patent for a gun on a rotating turret. This meant a ship's guns could be brought to bear on the enemy without moving the whole vessel, as with the Nancy. In 1863, the Danish ironclad Rolf Krake became the first ship in the world to have Coles's rotating gun turrets. Trading on this, and his reputation as the hero of Taganrog, Coles successfully lobbied the Admiralty to construct a turret gunship. In 1867, construction started on the turret ship HMS Captain at Laird Brothers Birkenhead shipyard, and 3 years later she was launched. But she was controversial. Masts and rigging on the main deck meant that the rotating gun turrets had to be placed on a lower deck just above the waterline. This and her very high masts also rendered the Captain unstable in heavy seas. In September 1870, HMS Captain capsized and sank in heavy weather off Cape Finisterre, with the loss of 483 lives, including that of her designer, Cowper Phipps Coles. Like Coles, Vice Admiral Andrei Alexandrovich Popov of the Imperial Russian Navy was a naval designer with unconventional ideas. In the 1870s, his circular gunboats, popularly known as the Popovkas, were launched. In theory, because of their circular shape, these vessels could engage the enemy from any angle with their 11-inch guns. But in practice, it proved a different story. The ships were difficult to steer and would spin uncontrollably from the recoil of their guns. These factors and their high cost meant that only 2 were ever built. Then, in 1880, Popov designed the Tsar's royal yacht, the Levadia, and included a unique feature in her design with a built-in beach. But from the beginning, she proved to be an unlucky ship. Her voyage from the shipyard in Scotland to Sebastopol was fraught with technical problems and took 6 months. In that time, Popov's main champion, Tsar Alexander II, had been assassinated. His successor, Alexander III, disliked both the Levadia and the perceived extravagance of Popov. After an unsuccessful maiden voyage, the Levadia was permanently anchored and stripped, with her hulk finally being struck off the Naval Register in 1926. As for Popov, well, he died in 1898, quite possibly of a broken heart. Some seagoing inventions had a more benign purpose, like the Swan of the Exe, invented by Captain George Peacock of Exmouth, seen here at the tiller of his creation. A talented inventor, Peacock devised this beautiful swan-like yacht, which was launched in 1865 purely for pleasure. For many years she could be seen gracing the River Exe until she was destroyed by fire sometime between the 2 world wars. The important Victorian pastime of music making gave the inventors of the day a fertile field for their creations. For example, American inventor Arthur S. Denny's giant steam organ, called the Improved Calliope, was demonstrated at Crystal Palace in 1859, but it received a mixed reception, mainly because of its excessive volume. As did his aerophone piano, combined with 40 trumpets, proving too large and noisy, even for the largest Victorian home. Probably because of its size and melodiousness, this cello piano found greater favour with the Parisians in the 1850s, whilst Frederick Kastner's singing lamp, which produced music by forcing hot air through glass pipes of specially made chandeliers, was also popular for a time. Finally, pride of place should go to the invention to which this film owes its name. This is the Castle in the Air, invented by a Belgian we only know as Monsieur Tobianski. Suspended by gas balloons above the 1894 Antwerp exhibition, it would house shops, restaurants, hotels and a theatre. Whilst investors loved the idea, the Belgian government didn't. and so it remained, just a fantasy castle in the air. And today, it's nice to know that we still have unconventional inventors, such as Kenji Kawakama from Japan, with this hay fever hat. The Victorian inventors would have been proud of him.